Hello and welcome to Energonomics audio podcast. I'm your host, Richa Mishra. India's maritime trade faces a critical juncture as escalating global conflicts threaten the stability of its vital shipping corridors. As the world's third largest oil importer, India is uniquely vulnerable to disruptions in maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, which handle a vast majority of its energy needs and merchandise exports. There is an urgent push for a national merchant fleet to reduce dependence on foreign shipping lines. Issues like financial buffers, security coordination, and infrastructure resilience, and more are being discussed. And this is exactly what we will discuss with my colleague Raja Simhan, who is also a subject expert. Hello, Raja, and welcome to Energonomics.
Thank you, Richa.
Raja, whenever there is a geopolitical tension, there's a major challenge we see in ferrying of oil and gas. Why is it so?
Yes, Richa, you are right. Actually, if you look at India, India is very heavily dependent on foreign ships. So that is the biggest problem which we have been facing for the last few years. In fact, not last few years, but it's more than few decades. We have not built a very strong fleet of shipping which are Indian flag vessels. That is one of the biggest concerns which we have. I say this is because there is a flag, say a Qatar flag or a Oman flag vessel or maybe anything, they give priority to their own shipping, whereas India cannot do that. So this is a big challenge where it is high time that we build our own shipping rate so that we are prepared for any other eventualities like this when it happens in future. I wish it doesn't happen.
I'm glad you raised that point, Raja, because that was exactly where I was heading to. That, would things be different if India had its own vessels? See, for example, a major private refiner, Reliance Industries, does have its own vessels. So its petrochem mostly is through its own vessels. So what stops our oil companies from doing so?
Exactly, Rija. In fact, it is a very high capex. Shipping is very, if you want to build ships, it takes really lots of time. And also, we don't have that kind of a competency to have our own shipbuilding. We have to again depend on a foreign country like China or Korea. So, companies do depend on foreign companies and take ships on charter, long-term charter or long-term lease, and they try to buy second-hand vessels which are like some few years old, and it makes very difficult for them to look at the situation because I'm going back to the earlier point which I mentioned. The shipping trade is in the last few years only we have actually developed so much in the shipping trade, whereas we have not been looking at shipping for a very long time. So that makes it very difficult. It is high time the government give priority to this industry and start looking at having our own fleet. This is not the case with shipping alone. Even if you look at the airline sector, we have the same problem where we are heavily dependent on foreign airlines for both passenger and cargo.
Very well explained, Raja. Before I move on to my next question, I just had a supplement question here. You said China is doing it, Korea is doing it. I really want to understand what is it that has been stopping us for so long, knowing that we need it. And had we had our own flag and our own vessels, the challenges we faced during the Ukraine-Russia war could also I presume, would have been lesser. So, I
Yes.
just don't understand where exactly is the hindrance. We know we need it, but then why aren't we doing it?
It is quite capital intensive, Richa. And in this case, it is not the government alone which can do this kind of massive investment. The private sector should also come in and they have to really pump in lots of money. That's what companies in Korea as well as China, even though it is completely dominant by the government. But still, if you look at the Korea, it is the private sector which has come in. So Korea could be a good example that we can replicate, where the private sector should come in and really start pumping in money rather than just the government doing. And in China's case, everything is different. So in this case also, it's completely different. And they really looked at this sector much, much ahead of all the others. In fact, Korea was once a dominant player, but the vision which China had in this sector, it really overtook Korea within a couple of decades. And now both the countries are, in fact, way, way ahead of the rest of the world. And And going back to your question, as if India has a good fleet, whether it will help us in doing the movement of energy, it may not happen that quickly because we still will be dependent on the other political reason. For instance, Amos, even though some of the ships, which are almost 800 ships, are stranded in the Persian Gulf, and it is of various nationalities. So it is not one country specific or two country specific problem. It affects every country. Even if we have our own fleet, it can only help to a certain extent, Richa.
I'm glad you stressed on this aspect, Raja. It brings me to my next question. I read somewhere that the current shipping landscape for India is defined by a perfect storm of insurance hurdles. And New Delhi is working on a sovereign reinsurance fund to counter the withdrawal of global insurers. So, do you think it will help to cushion the impact?
If you're looking at the war risk kind of situation, yes, Richa. In fact, see, insurance is all about spreading of the risk. In a war-like situation, risk actually gets concentrated in smaller geographical areas. When I say this, when the concentration is in a very narrow stretch, in this case, the Hormuz is just a 30-kilometer stretch we are referring to. So the war risk insurance is quite high in this kind of a situation, whereas when the disturbance in the Suez related happened, it wasn't as massive as the situation currently is. So obviously, Indian companies, if you look at the cargo pattern and cargo, we are not very heavily dependent on insurance related issues because we still again depend heavily on foreign vessels, and these people have their own way of putting up insurance. Suddenly they will say GRA today and war risk related insurance, and Indian companies are not very well prepared to handle this kind of situation. And these are all levied at the last moment. They just give 10 days or 15 days notice and they start putting up this insurance. So obviously the people in the trade should be concerned about all these factors, but it's also learning from them. They have not witnessed something like this for decades. So maybe in future they may anticipate a lot of things. And insurance, yes, it is one of the most important where they have to concentrate on as well.
Well, I think the key takeaway from the recent past, whether it was Ukraine-Russia conflict or the current situation, and prior to that, when there was Iran sanction or challenges in Iraq, one learning for us as far as setting up infrastructure is one aspect, but the entire value chain has to be taken care of for the industry to be able to cushion the impact of any geopolitical tensions or challenges which we face. That is where we stand. And to conclude, as you pointed out, that it is time that we focused on the industry, not only the government, but even the private sector started giving more attention to this industry.
Exactly, Virich. I think it is the government. If you look at the history of the last 5 or 6 decades, the big investment actually has come from the government. Whether you take the Shipping Corporation of India, which actually led the entire maritime sector in India. But if you look beyond that, there has not been a big in terms of fleet addition by the private sector. So I think it's now high time the government take note of this and try to give a lot of subsidies or assistance in various forms to help the private sector pump in lots of money so that. See, again, I go back to we call the Desi, the industry parlance, they call the Desi fleet. So I think it is critical that we build a very strong Desi fleet of maybe hundreds of ships. In fact, the government has already started doing it last couple of years, but I think it's a high time they kickstart at a very rapid pace like what China did.
So basically, never too late. We can still learn and up our scale.
Correct, because this is not an industry which is going to be there for a few years, but it is going to be there for few centuries. So, but it's high time that we start preparing now.
Thank you so much, Raja, to squeeze in this time for our listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure, Richard.
This is all we have in this episode of Energonomics. Till we meet again, thank you. For the first-time listeners, Energonomics is a podcast and video series which focuses on decoding the complexities of the energy sector. We try to examine how geopolitics, government policies, and economic shifts impact energy prices and security. Through the episode, we try to dissect and demystify the issues which have a direct impact on you and I.